sort of shifted from there into lending. Originally, first buying privately held mortgage notes, and then pretty quickly I started brokering new loans. People started asking me all sorts of weird things. Can you finance a houseboat? Can you finance a trailer park? Can you finance a restaurant? And eventually I settled on single family, mostly, with mixes of everything. And for the better part of 20, 25 years, I've been doing lending. And then 2008 happened, and lending became not fun at all. And I had a brokerage. We had 25 loan agents in there. We were doing probably $400 million a year in volume.
Mark?
Yeah.
Is it going to turn your mic on? Your mic is not on.
The mic is for the video, not for you.
Yeah,
Can
mic is going feeding into his video.
can you not hear me?
Yeah, I can't hear that well, actually.
Okay. Is this any better?
Yeah, a little louder.
Okay. Sorry.
PA system coming. You guys, bear with us.
So anyway, ended up doing a lot of loans. For every loan you do, you underwrite multiple other loans. And so I learned very fast how to look into what was going on. What people tell you, lender packages, realtor packages, you kind of have to dig in and analyze what's real and what's not. And especially sellers like to inflate their income and deflate their expenses. That's kind of natural. So one of the things I want to cover tonight is really understanding what you're looking for and how to analyze what you're looking at. One of the big things that we're all chasing is yield. Just to get a sense, how many of you are still at a job? How many have jobs? Okay. Any full-time investors? Okay. So when you're working, obviously you get a paycheck, but if you don't show up, you don't get paid. I had a commercial condominium project I was pitching. This is 1984, I think. Went to a big commercial guy in New York, and he kind of looked at me and said, we were talking about this. And he said, real estate's a really stupid business. If you're not out there working, you're not making money, commission. Me, I'm in an inventor comes to me with a new product. I get the patent attorney, I line up manufacturing, marketing, distribution, and when I go to bed at night, I know that in the morning my bank account's going to be bigger than it was when I went to sleep. So I've always been looking at, okay, so how can I get away from the job? And probably why you're all here is passive income. And passive income is really critical if you want to be able to support yourself. I'm not quite sure what's going to be left of Social Security when we all retire, or any other pension plans. But real estate is a game that we're all chasing. And the difference between yield at 2% or 10% or 18% is much greater than you would think. So just to give you a sense, oops, I need to wake this up. Where'd it go? So if you take $1,000 and invest it at 2%, you're going to end up with basically $1,200 after 30 years without touching it. At 10%, if you can find something at 10% these days, private net lending, you're going to be around $1,700. At 18%, you're going to be at $212,000. That's a huge difference. You can retire on $212,000. You can't retire on $1,700. So the difference between 10% yield and 18% yield is huge. And if you get 20 or 25 or 30, it's even bigger. And if anyone ever wonders why you get so many Visa card or credit card applications, credit card companies are not making the 18 or 29% they're charging you. They're making 2.5% from the vendor every time a transaction happens. And those turn 12 times a year. So 2.5 times 12, you're at 30. Sometimes it goes faster than that, so you're at 35% plus your 29% exponential yield. So they can afford to lose some money every now and then with bad credit. So anyway, so yield is critical. If you make a mistake on your analysis, you are going to lose yield. So I want to start with one, whoops, where'd it go? Here we go. So how many of you actually looked at an apartment package, a commercial flyer? Okay, so for those that haven't seen it, I'll go through a little more in detail. When you get an apartment package, I'm actually looking at two different properties in Houston. This first one is not as great a property as the second one. The second one is kind of higher end, but the package is very well put together, and you'll see the difference very fast. But I want to point out some of the things that are happening in there. And I'm sorry, going back to the computer, we didn't have a dongle for the laptop. So, so when you this particular property, Northgate in Houston, this is a 194 unit property. And the first thing I want to know is, where in Houston is it? So
Mark, can you make it full screen so that text gets bigger?
Yep. Oops. That's
the middle one.
where'd it go? Here.
Yeah. Middle one.
Yep. Is that better?
Just hit the plus button in the top bar. Not that one. Yeah, that one. Okay. All right. You have to
I have to scroll a little bit.
go a little bit. Hit the minus once. I think you hit the plus twice. And now you can scroll a little bit.
Okay. Yeah, that gives us, some sense. Okay. So one of the first things I want to see is, where in Houston is it? So there's a map here. Whoops, where'd it go? That's kind of a close-up. So here, say it's North Houston up in here. So let me back up just a bit. Before we even look at the property, we look at the market. And if you go into a market like San Francisco, or the Bay Area in general, it's a very strong market. There's a lot of competition. And that even in the downturn, things are going to pick up because there's so much demand here. There are other smaller markets where, in the middle of Kansas, or I'm not picking on Kansas, but middle of, some of the less populated states, small towns, if one corporation closes and that's the major employer in town, your real estate is going to suffer tremendously. If you're in a bigger metropolitan area, and there's a very broad spectrum of industries, you're going to do much better in a downturn or an upturn. So one of the things we look for are really fast or really strong employment growth, because if there's employment growth, there's going to be population growth. And if there's population growth, it's almost like a rising tide. All the ships will rise. Does that make sense? So Houston happens to be one of the fastest growing cities in the country. They're adding ridiculous amounts of jobs. In a downturn, it also gets hit pretty hard. I mean, there are always cycles up and down. And some areas, Tulsa, for example, is much, Tulsa, Oklahoma, is much flatter. Houston is a much bigger curve. But when you're at the bottom, you've got a huge rise, and then you better get out before it hits the top. And learning how to read those markets we'll cover in a different evening. But Houston is doing really well. Certain areas are better than others, obviously. Within Houston has no zoning. So you get the classic cartoon where you get the pit bull breeder next to the nursery school. It doesn't quite work. You really have to look at the neighborhoods and understand where you're going. So this particular one, it's up in the north of Houston, which is growing really well. There's a development underneath the Northgate sign here. The Woodlands, which is a little like Santana Row on steroids, Texas-sized. So that area is going really well. We like North Houston. My partners and I just closed on a 220 unit a couple months ago up in that area. This particular one is a little south of there, just south of the airport. So let's go back up to the top and look at what's in the package. Oops, looking for the first page. Okay. So they're describing the basic market here, investment highlights. They're calling this a value add property, which means it's been, it needs renovation. We don't know how much. Some value add properties are much more work than others. We had a property in Tulsa that was a value add property because the highway in front was being reconstructed. So the access was blocked. It was very difficult to get into the property. And as a result, the occupancy was down to about 84%. So the property itself had some deferred maintenance, but minimal stuff. The real problem was the highway. And there were things that we thought we could do to mitigate that particular property, that particular access issue. While we were in contract on that one, occupancy dropped from 84% to 72%, so we walked away. So that didn't work. But value add doesn't always mean huge amounts of work. So you're trying to understand what really is going on in the property. What's the employment center, what's around it. So I'm not going to go through the details on this. We'll look on the next package. There are some pictures here. You can see there are pitched roofs. This over here, this looks more like a flat roof, and this is actually a mix. One of the things we look at in this particular area, and I highlighted this in yellow, the projected growth in this particular area over 5 years is 4.23%, which is fairly low within a mile. If you go 3-mile radius or 5-mile radius, it's much higher. So I'm going, this is not a great area to be investing in. This is, I'm already negatively disposed from the second page on this portfolio, on this profile. So, there's obviously other data on here. I'm not going to go through all the details, but you can look at, by race, by income, single-family home values in the area. All of that is important, but I'm not going to go into all of it right now because we only have so much time. Next thing, looking at the property itself, the unit mix. This thing has 150 151 bedrooms and only 44 two-bedrooms. Can you guys read that? Is that big enough?
Yeah.
Okay. So the larger the unit in general, the slower the turnover. And unless you have rent control like in San Francisco or Berkeley or wherever, you want the larger units because you'll have less turnover. When there's turnover, you're losing rent, whether it's a week or a month. You have the costs of repainting, possibly recarpeting. When someone's in there, we rarely fix. I mean, we do basic maintenance, but there's no major cost. So the lower the turnover, the better you are. If you have 3/4 one-bedrooms and only 1/4 two-bedrooms, you're going to have a higher expense property. That makes sense?
Yeah.
So that's another strike against it. Looking down here at the income and expense, they've got gross scheduled rent. I'm just going to zip down because we'll do the other one more in depth. I'm looking, okay, the management fee is probably on the low side at 3% on a property like this. I skipped over the date, but this was built in 1960. It's going to have a much higher management cost. It's going to be much more work on the maintenance side than a newer property. But even with the low expense here, you've got $4,300 and change in per unit expense, which is reasonable. I've seen people trying to sell me deals where they're claiming the expenses are $2,500 a door per year. I look at those and I laugh. And when you look at the details, they're not paying management, they're not maintaining the place. If each area is going to have a slightly different cost per door, but if you're below that, more than likely they're cheating on the property. They're not maintaining it, they're not putting in the expenses needed. The payroll might be low, so they're not taking care of their tenants. We had one property in Far East Texas, in Longview. My partner had seen 2 units. We put it in contract. It took about 4.5 months to get it in contract. and we had tried to get on the property. We'd sent a few people. The owner screamed and said, keep your people from trespassing on our property until we're in contract. So he spent all this time getting in contract. I set up for my management company to have 7 people to inspect the property, come out from Dallas. It's about a 2-hour drive. We all arrive. By the 10th unit, I said, stop your people, I'm out of here. Literally, we walked into the units. Number one, it was middle of the week, middle of the day. Most tenants were at home and in bed, so they're all on welfare. Number two, they hadn't maintained the property at all. It's Texas, it gets hot. There's air conditioning units in every unit. The air conditioning units, obviously air conditioning, has a condenser and water drips. The drains had clogged. Rather than unclogging them, they put in these PVC pipes coming out of the ceiling across through the bathroom wall and dripping down into the sink. They had taken the pans under the condensers and taken a coat hanger and a big washer to lift the pan towards the new drain. I mean, everything was like that. So when you look at the expenses in that property, you know why the maintenance is low. They're not maintaining anything. So when you're looking at these, it may be that they're accurately reporting what they're spending, but it doesn't mean that's what it costs to run that property. That make sense?
If it is cheap, why not? You can fix it up and sell it.
If there are easy things to do, but there was a property, and this was in Memphis. The roofs hadn't been taken care of and been leaking for about 20 years. And I look at that, and I know if the roof's been leaking, then there's rot inside the walls. Okay, so I wouldn't touch that property with a 10-foot pole. So when people aren't maintaining things, you have no idea what's hidden. It's very hard to tell what's behind the walls. That 15-unit building I got into the battle with the rent board on, we did, top to bottom, renovation. New plumbing and electrical from the street up, new roof, new windows, new doors. And we ended up, after we sold it, the seller came back to me a year and a half later, said, you told me you had done the stucco, we found rot behind the stucco. Like, we didn't touch the stucco. The only thing we didn't touch, and there was rot behind it. So we, had coffee and discussed, and everything was good. But you have no idea what's hiding behind the walls. And in a poorly maintained property, small problems become big problems. If you let termites go, for example, they're going to chew away. You might bring the exterminator in afterwards, but you've got Swiss cheese holding up your house now. So if a poorly maintained property has been there for too long, it's a problem. If it's been the last few years, not a big deal. So this one here, they're showing total expenses for $842,000 relative to effective gross income of $1.2 million. So expenses are running about 70%, which is huge. Rent comparables.
What's a good percentage number for expenses that you like to see?
Great question, actually. So properties are graded A, B, C, and D. So A is typically a newer property within 10 years old. B is 10 to 20. C is 20 to 30, maybe 35 years old. And D is not only old, but also in a war zone. So a D property, I wouldn't want to collect rent at night. Sometimes not even during the day. C minus is kind of in between. And there's A plus, B minus, they're intermediate steps. So on an A property, your expenses are going to be somewhere around 45% maybe. B properties, 50, 55. C pushing 60. And a D property, who knows? We looked at one in New Orleans. Their security budget was $120,000 a year. So that was the tip-off. It's like, this is not a great neighborhood. So looking at the rent comps, first you want to look at, are the comps really comps? And here, if you scoot down, these are all kind of within the same area. 70s to late 70s, reasonable. They're all within the same size range. 100 units is almost the same as a 300 unit, not quite. But as for comparables, you're good. So we're at $74 cents a square foot on the rent. The average of the others is 78, so there's a little bit of upside, not a whole lot. And occupancy is 94% average. We're at 94, so we're pretty well occupied. So clearly they're running this place decently, but there's not a whole lot of upside. The other piece, so there's property details. Here's, roof type, pitched flat roof. A flat roof will leak, period. It's just a matter of when. So if you buy a property with flat roofs, count on replacing that. You're maintaining it on a regular basis. Even there are new roofing systems that last longer, but in Texas and other states, water seeps in a tiny bit, freezes. I mean, it'll crack concrete, it'll crack rock. It's going to crack your roof. So we try to stay away from flat roofs as much as possible. The last piece on this is there is an area right here called Greenspoint, which is right where this is. It's right next to the Greenspoint Mall. Greenspoint is also known as Guns Point. Not a great area. So personally, I didn't even run the numbers on this. I pass. So I explained a lot, but within about 2.5 minutes, you can go through that and find those things and move on. Make sense? So let's move on to one I like better. Let's start. This is the club at Stablechase. So how do I get rid of this? Here we go. So the club at Stablechase, let's see if we can find a map here.
How much were they selling?
So Texas is an interesting place. They do not disclose, and you cannot find out what the value of the properties are
You mean on purchase and sale?
on purchase and sale. So you talk to the realtor, they're going to tell you what the seller is expecting, but they're not going to publish it. And the game with the tax man is no matter what you bought it for, you're going to argue that it's worth less. So there are many properties that are bought for $5 million, and the tax roll they're showing up on the tax rolls at $3 million.
But after the property sold, should be on the public record, right?
The sale price is not on the property record
Texas.
in Texas. In California, it is. In many other states, it is. In Texas, it's a secret.
Why is it?
It's Texas. I don't know.
Okay. Everybody hearing it?
Yes.
Aren't there paid services like LoopNet or something where you can get a really good idea of what the prices are?
When you're looking at these, I mean, anytime you go into an area, so before you buy something in Houston, you talk to umpteen realtors, or real estate agents. They're not realtors on the commercial side, but real estate agents, property managers, appraisers, attorneys, title people. I mean, you basically do your due diligence and you have a pretty good sense of what's going on. So, you might, in a lesser area, you might be buying a C property in Houston in the $30,000 range per unit. You could be paying $100,000 or more in the better parts. So you go down, more towards central Houston, you might be paying $120,000, $150,000 per door. But you need to know the market. I mean, that's part of your due diligence when you're setting this up. So, when you have someone, when you set it up and then you're looking for investors, unlike this package that you get from the realtors, from the real estate agents, we look for other comps. So we know this sold for X amount because we talked to the agent, or we went in and talked to the buyer or the seller. So we get that data and we disclose it to the investors. So you have a better sense. Just like the rent comp table, we have a sale comp table, which you would have in any state. It's just easier.
Also, I noticed from looking at property packages from Houston is that the market there is so hot and sparks so much interest that they don't state what the asking price is of the property. I mean, they use this term determined by the marketplace or something?
Right,
It's almost like you're almost participating in an auction.
right.
Well,
But when you talk to the selling agent, or the listing agent, he has a pretty good sense of what's going on or what the seller is expecting. And especially if you go in and let the agent double represent, both buyer and seller. Going in, we have an attorney anyway, and I don't believe that a real estate agent is going to really represent me in these deals. So typically you'll get sort of the inside track. Well, they're expecting 10 million on this, but I know there's an offer coming in higher than that, so you might want to go higher. He won't tell you the number, but there's some fudge factor in there. So at that point you determine, well, there's no way I'm paying over 10 million for this, it's just not worth it, and you pass. Sometimes there's one guy that's way high, and the seller may not believe that they can perform, so they may not even get it, even though they're a high bid. Or sometimes they do get it and they can't perform, but you're in second or third position. So as soon as they fall out, now the seller is very motivated to get this. He's already spent the money in his mind. And if you can close and perform in 60 days and actually come through because you have a history of coming through, they'll take your lower offer. So very often when we go in and bid on these, we're not trying to get the top bid, but just in the running. And then when it falls out, we get it. And we have so many offers out there that we get good ones, often just on the rebound. It's pretty cool. So ARA is one of the huge brokerage houses, and just looking, I'll back up a couple of pages. The first package we looked at had, I think, 8 pages in it. This one has 70 pages. ARA is going to be sending this to thousands of investors. So the problem with a well-documented, well-presented package is you're not going to get the deal of the century. You're going to do much better if you get an off-market property or before ARA puts it out there. And if you've already worked with, let me see, there are 6 or 7 agents on this, all of whom have a very large Rolodex of investors. So if you're one of their performing buyers, before this gets sent out to their list of 10,000 buyers, you're going to get a peek first. But don't expect a deal. If you can find a seller that hasn't listed with ARA and you don't have a pretty package and you're putting all this stuff together yourself, you'll probably do better on the property, on the price. But that's the art of finding. We're not touching that right now. So on this package, he's got a lot more photos. You can tell that this is a property built in 1999. We'll find that in a minute. But it's a much nicer looking property than the last one. And this is actually a broken condo project. So these were built as condos.
It was entitled as condos?
They're entitled as condos.
They were rented out because they couldn't sell them?
Right. Yeah.
Is it a hybrid?
Hybrid in what sense?
In the sense that some of the condo owners living at the property with rentals?
No, they're all rentals.
Okay.
So property highlights Class A, fractured condominium investment, opportunity to increase rents through interior renovations. So there are very different standards. You have the 1960 property that we looked at a few minutes ago, and you have this that was built 14 years ago, and they're already talking about renovating. So typically what you'll find is, someone in an A property doesn't like a 14-year-old refrigerator, but when they replace it, a C property owner will buy it and put it in for their tenants, which makes total sense because if a refrigerator is working fine, it's just not stylish enough, or, these days there are obviously energy issues as well, but maybe the refrigerator wasn't the perfect example there. This one is, the last one was over here in Greenspoint. This one is a little further west, higher rent district. I have a friend who's buying right in this area also, paying I think $76,000 a door, and the numbers work like clockwork. Ours is up in here, airport, so up in here near the Woodlands. We actually ended up paying $33,000 a door, which was a total steal. And our rents right now are at 81 cents a square foot, and you'll see it on the rents around here are down around $1, $1.05 a square foot. So there's a huge amount of upside in those. Obviously, it's not quite there yet. This area is still coming up, and the Woodlands, which is this area here, that super high rent district, and there's an ExxonMobil campus that's being built 2 miles south of the Woodlands. That's a $1.2 billion project. They're adding 10,000 jobs. When a company adds a job, typically you get 2 to 3 or 4 support jobs. So anyone who's working as an engineer or whatever for ExxonMobil is going to need all the services. So if ExxonMobil is creating 10,000 jobs, they're really creating 30 to 40,000 jobs. So it has a huge impact. And obviously that's just jobs and families come with it.
So I actually used to live in Houston. So I believe that Highway 8 is a toll road, and that 45 and those other arteries are regular freeways.
Correct.
So anybody who lives along the Highway 8 corridor is going to have a much higher rent because they can pay to drive on a toll road every day, versus people who are on 45 or on whatever the other highways are, 2 something and 90, that are regular freeways. So that your area is probably more determining what your difference in rents are, more than the age or condition of the property. Those probably aren't the driving forces. It's probably where people live, how much rent they make, things like that. That probably the things I look at first.
Yeah. No, and that makes total sense. Yeah. I mean, within the area, I mean, you can have, I mean, it's ideal to buy a C or C minus property in an A area. Buy the worst house on the block, essentially.
Right.
Because you can always improve. If you're buying a B property in a C area, you can't change the area. So your B property is going to degrade into a C because those are the tenants that are attracted to that area. So, as you're mentioning, I mean, it all, look for the area first.
Yeah, I'd also look at the distances too. So I think one of the earlier slides talked about 1 mile, 3 mile, 5 mile radius. It can take you 45 minutes to cross Houston.
Oh yeah, yeah.
So 1 and 3 mile drives are not significantly different. And so how you scale your analysis needs to match the area.
Right. No, that makes sense. So, and I don't want to skip around too much, but you'll see that this particular area is growing much faster than the Greens Point area. So, scooting down more. So, area highlights. There, here the ARA has done a really good job of highlighting what's around there. So they're going to talk about the energy corridor, Liberty Northwest Business Center, Hewlett Packard's 2 minutes northwest, other major employers. They're really giving you the info on the area because they're selling the area first. Then they're selling the property. So here you can see what's around it. I'm not going to go through and sell you Houston, but you get a sense of how this is presented. Much more detailed than the last one. Area highlights continued. Obviously lots of pretty pictures. And they took this in the fall when there were pretty colors. I mean, it's a much more appealing package. Then they get into the property. More pictures. Occupancy here, 91%. So you'd have to look at what's around it to see if that occupancy is low. With the growth around Houston, that occupancy will most likely rise. But you don't want to underwrite it at market occupancy. If market occupancy is 95% and they're running 91, you underwrite it at 91. I'm not going to.
got rent comps in there somewhere.
Rent comps are further down, yeah, so we'll get there. Year completed 99. Net rentable, it just gives you all the information. So unit mix here, basically a third, 1, 2, and 3 bedrooms. So much more desirable than 75% 1 bedrooms and 25% 2s. Remember, these were built as condos. So they're larger units. They're nicer units. All the amenities in the community. Lots of pictures, more mechanical systems. Personnel overview. You basically have 4 people working there: 1 manager, 1 leasing, a lead maintenance, and assistant maintenance. And then very often you'll find a security officer. You basically find a police officer in the local force, and you offer them free rent to live there. So they come home, they park their squad car, and hopefully they walk around the property. Sometimes you give them free rent, and the deal is they're supposed to walk around and they don't. So then you need to find another officer. But very often on some of these, you'll find, especially if you're buying from a bank, instead of 4 people, they might have 6 or 7 people working here. So they're overstaffed. So then you're underwriting based on their costs, but you know that you can trim that.
So why do banks typically have these overstaffed properties? I mean, they're not very good at managing the property?
Banks know how to manage money, not properties. It's just not their thing. And you'd think that they could hire good property managers, but they don't. I can't explain. I'm sure some banks do, but most of what I've seen is way overstaffed. You know, if we think about $1,000 a door in payroll costs, it's not unusual to see $2,000 a door from a bank, which I like because the NOI is lower and we're buying it based on the NOI. You know, floor plans, you can look at, are the floor plans decent or not? These guys have lots of different ones. Financial analysis, more pictures. So let's make this bigger. So on here, gross scheduled rents. Does anyone know what loss to lease is?
Go ahead and explain that.
So if the rent, I'm just going to use round numbers. If the rent on a 1-bedroom is $1,000 a month, but there's someone in there that's moved in 9 months ago and they're paying $950, there's $50 gap between the $950 and today's current rent. So that $50 is lost to current lease. So when you think about the current market value of all your units, you use current market value. The identical unit you rented last month was at $1,000, but you have 6 at $50 less. You have a $300 loss to lease. So you have your gross potential rent less the loss to lease is really what the market rent is once you're 100% occupied. But obviously on smaller units, you're not going to have quite as smaller properties. You're not going to have quite as many tiers or line items. But basically, you have gross potential income. Take out the vacancy. Non-revenue units might be a manager or employee-occupied unit. Might be the courtesy officer unit. Collection loss, obviously. Concessions, sometimes to get someone in there because the property has been vacant for the apartment has been vacant for a few weeks. You'll give them $100 or $200 off the first month rent. So that's a concession. So that comes in there. So you come up with your total effective gross income. This one's 1.735 million. Expenses, repair and maintenance, payroll. You can look through all of this, and they break this up per door. So repairs and maintenance, they're showing $1,000 a door. Rule of thumb, I usually think $450 to $600. So these guys have everything. It's an A property, so they're putting more into maintenance. If you're replacing a refrigerator, it might be a $600 refrigerator instead of a $300 refrigerator. So your cost per door is higher, but it's also covered by the rent. So each market, I mean, there are books out there. They're not inexpensive, but there are books every market. You can look at Houston, you can look at Dallas, you can look at San Francisco, you can look at Tulsa or Miami. They're going to have, in this particular area, your average rent, your average costs are going to be this. So learn your market, understand what the rules of thumb are for your market, and underwrite it that way. Yeah. There's a book. It's like a $300 book. The most banks have it, or large real estate firms, and then a few investors. I'll try to find the title, and I can forward it. I'm sorry.
What kind of book is it?
It's a reference book. It basically tells you the costs, the average costs of each item for multifamily, for offices, for various other things in each market. So, it might be RM. Yeah, it might be.
It's also $400.
Yeah. Okay, so I have 300, you had 400. Bless you. So anytime you're looking at this, you're going to look at, and I have a little worksheet. We're going to go through a quick exercise later. But you're looking at whether these costs are reasonable. So you're looking at this. Total expenses per door are $5,500 a door. The last one was $4,300. So on an A property, your maintenance is going to be easier, and you're going to have far fewer service calls, but the expense of each one is going to be more, because you can't just go in and kind of stick it back together. You have to replace it because your tenants expect more. So at $5,500 a door, you're looking at $815,000 in expenses on a 1.64 million, so at 50% expenses on this. So for an A property, that might be on the high side, but this is also an older A property, is 15, 16 years old. So it's probably about right. Assumptions, interesting thing, if you look down here, this is all pro forma, which means it's not actual. So they're taking what happened for the last 12 months and they're projecting forwards. So this is not reality. So you don't want to buy on these numbers. And we'll look at that in a minute. So I'm going to move fairly fast. Let me make these a little smaller. Okay, so rent comparables. Can you guys still read the numbers there? This particular one, we're at $95 cents a square foot. The average around there is $1.09. So again, check whether your comps are real comps, but it looks like there is upside in this. So I like that. These are relatively close, but again, you want to drive you want to actually visit each of those properties to see if they're real comps. This goes through the amenity comparison. You know, which of these comps has what amenities, how many pools, how many other facilities. And I'm going to skip through all of that. Rent comparable summary to new product. So these are 10 years older. So this is A to A, but this is new product. So here you're 93 cents a square foot compared to $1.18, $1.39. You've got some pretty high rents in there. So potentially, if you do improve this, they're saying this is a value add based on improvements. If you put a few $1,000s into a unit, you can get that much more rent. So you have to figure out whether that's worth it or not. Amenity comparison, they go into the comps. I'm not going to go through all of that. And the appendices, they have news articles, et cetera, et cetera. So that's kind of what's in the offering memorandum for ARA. The other thing that they give you, and of course, which is where I look next, is the trailing 12 profit and loss. And this is going to be more of a challenge. There we go. So,
did they provide cap rate in the other document?
They probably did. Well, no, they didn't provide cap rate because there's no price. So I'll get into cap rate in a minute. So when I do my analysis, I look at the offering memorandum to understand what we're dealing with and what they're claiming, and then I look at the real numbers. And a lot of times they'll give you a P&L just for the last year, or the last 3 years. I ask for it month by month. I want to see what are the trends through the year, and if you can get more than 1 year at a time, that's even better. But sometimes occupancy goes down in the summer, or sometimes it goes down in the winter. You really want to understand what's going on there. Are your tenants more students? Are they more seasonal workers? I mean, again, you really want to understand what the tenant base is. So you look at throughout the year. Expenses as well are, especially on if you're paying for heat or hot water. Does that spike in the summer? Does that spike in the winter? Heating or cooling. So you want to understand those. And you also want to look at, how does this compare to what their pro forma numbers are? because I'm going to underwrite based on these. So this is all summary, and then they give you the detail down below. And I'm not going to go through that detail, so we'll stay with a summary. But if you look at these month by month, well, let's, yeah, so they'll have the totals over here. The other piece I'm looking at is the rent roll. And where'd it go?
This
So-
was Class A, right, John?
This is Class A, yeah.
So for Class A, what's the rule of thumb for management fees?
It's not as much, there's, I mean, Class A and B, at this size, you're probably going to pay about 3%, maybe 3 to 3.5%, probably 3%. Again, you're going to have less maintenance issues, but your tenants are going to expect a higher service. So the staffing is going to be similar, it might even be higher here, and you're certainly going to have to pay for better quality service people and managers. So even though it's less work, there's more work, kind of thing. So, combination. So on the rent rolls, I tend to go to the bottom. I mean, you can look at the comparisons. This has a lot of floor plans, so it's a little harder, but usually you have 2 or 3 or 4 floor plans. So within one floor plan, what's the variation? So usually they were within 10, 15, 20, 30 bucks, sometimes 50. The property, we looked at a property in New Orleans, the market rate was $550, and the Section 8 people were paying up to $1,100. But the Section 8 were paying between $580 and $1,100. I mean, there was whatever they could get away with. So how am I supposed to underwrite that? So we ended up walking away from that property. But if you look at the end, the summary, oops, one page back. If you look at the totals, you can basically compare averages and everything here to the numbers that are on the profit and loss. So you want to make sure that what they're claiming on the profit and loss matches what they have here. If they're saying they're 91% occupied, you can even count, I mean, this is 150 units or so. You can actually count how many vacants there are, and you'll probably find 15 of them in there, plus or minus. If you find 20 vacants and they're saying they're 91% occupied, there's a discrepancy, and you want to find it. So we take all of that, and everyone has their own spreadsheet. But let me try to get this a little bigger.
Want to zoom in?
Yeah.
At the very bottom right.
There it is.
Bar,
Okay.
and drag it over.
Yeah, let's do that. Okay. So where I start here is the seller's numbers in the pink column. So I'm using their gross scheduled rents, physical vacancy, all that. I come up with effective gross income of 1.648 million. And when I ran my numbers, I agreed with that because I didn't get into it too far. On the expense side, again, this is all from the P&L. I'm not taking the numbers off the pro forma from the offering memorandum because I don't trust them. These are real numbers. So I'm looking. These are the numbers I got from the seller's P&L on the pink, and then I look at my rules of thumb. So they spent $1,425 a door on repairs and maintenance. I'm going, why? So that's a question for the agent. You know, were they expensing capital expenditures? You know, or is there some other reason that the costs are so high? Typically, repairs and maintenance, we tend to think $300 to $600 a door. But again, you know, it's just I'm looking at what their numbers are, and I'm looking how I would normally underwrite this, or how I would think I would run the property, and come up with numbers that are not too dissimilar, but my expenses are lower. So I'm thinking I can probably cut this out. I'm not going to count on that until I talk to them. The other big one here is the insurance. They're paying $732 a door. Typically across most of the United States, I budget $250 a door as my rule of thumb. In Texas, in Houston with hurricane insurance, $375 is closer. $732, I need to find out more. And I certainly wouldn't make an offer based on this without talking to the agent and finding out why that's so high. And I'd probably call my insurance broker and get actual quotes.
And in Texas, is the property reassessed regarding the taxes? Is the property reassessed upon sale?
The property is reassessed upon sale, and then you fight it automatically. And where it lands is somewhere a bit higher. So on this one, I actually didn't change the taxes. I should have changed the taxes. But I think I took what they had pro forma. I can't remember. Again, I did this quickly. I'm not looking to buy this property. I'm not an A buyer. Typically, A units, A properties are purchased by real estate investment trusts, insurance companies, essentially institutional investors. They're less work, they're less return, and they last longer. For the higher returns, we tend to find B and C properties. I'll look at a C minus, I will not touch a D. Some people love Ds. Big cash flow, typically. Lots of work. A D is a job. It's not an investment.
Did you find those numbers from one of those reference books you mentioned?
Yeah, you can find your rules of thumb from a reference.
Plug them in.
Yeah.
In.
But again, even within that, I mean, the difference between the Galleria area, sort of central Houston, and outlying areas where this is going to be different also. Because someone has to drive all the way in and deal with the parking and whatever in the center is going to have to be paid more. So if they say $1,200 a door is average for Houston, the Galleria is going to be higher. This might be a little lower.
So those reference books have like regional versions?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Or it's one reference book, but within the pages it covers the different regions. Yeah. Yeah. So on this one, let me back up a little bit. Oops. Okay. Can you still read that? Okay. So when you look at this, you got the 55. They were at 64.25 a door. I'm at 55.45, including everything. Net operating expenses, net operating income 827,000, substantially higher than what they're showing. So I'm saying, okay, I think there's upside in here. Again, this is shooting from the hip. There's a lot more research that's going to go into this, but I don't want to talk to this broker and get him all excited that he has a new buyer, because I don't want to buy this. But again, you go through the analysis, you find out what these are, and if you can buy based on the 697 NOI. Does everyone know NOI, net operating income, cap rates? Anyone unfamiliar with those terms? Okay. So if I'm buying at 700,000, I can bring it up to 827,000. I've created a huge amount of equity. So again, we're looking at the property. Where is it being operated inefficiently? Where can I make a difference without too much effort? And how much upside is there? And based on that, I go over here, put in 20% down payment $2 million. I plugged in 10 million just as a ballpark. I know that my friend is paying more per door than 67,000, and we paid about half that. So I just came up with a number. I have no idea. Talking to the agent, I would give us a better starting point. But really, what I'm looking at is I've got this NOI at where's my cap rate? At 8.3 cap, which on an A property I think is unrealistic in Houston. I'm not going to get it, but at this price, I would buy it. At a 6 cap, which is probably where it'll go, I'm not going to touch it. And again, this is a great investment for a real estate investment trust that has a lower cost of capital. I like to give my investors, 20+% annually. they're happy with 6%, 8%, if that. We're talking to one guy, he was saying 6% overall, so 3% cash on cash, 3% on the back end. 6% on the entire thing.
People are investing in it?
Funds. They're institutional funds. One of my sponsors has been doing this for the last 20 years. His average return to his investors is 39% annually. Think back to those yield curves at the beginning. 6%, 39%. What happens over 30 years? Huge difference. So this is, if you have,
That guy, does he mostly buy C property?
no, A.
How do you get 39% annually on an A property?
Oh, no, I'm sorry, the 39%. He's buying B's and C's. Yeah, B's and C's. He's trying to get A's, but he's not at that rate. And a lot of times, he'll find an A property, but in distress. And he bought a lot the last couple of years before cap rates started compressing.
Right.
So he's doing well. And he sold everything in 2007. So he got out before the crash. And then he's now reinvesting. It means all the investors he paid off are now coming back to him. So we're looking typically for 8 cap, 1.6 debt service coverage. This is 1.52, so it's a little under. So again, you have to just play with it, play with interest rates, play with down payment. And cash on cash return, we typically like to see 12 going in. But on an A property, I'll break that because I know it's less work. So that's the basic analysis. These analyzer spreadsheets, I mean, everyone has different ones. Some are much more complex than this. But I can send you a copy of this, I think. I'll double check with the copyright. Any questions on what we've covered so far?
How do you get these kinds of deals? Like, are there newsletter lists that you subscribe to? Or is it the Old Boys Network? I mean, how do you get these folks to forward stuff?
A lot of it is relationship building. So again, when you go into a new market, you want to build your team. So I'll go into a market and I'll go down there for 3 days, and I'll typically line up 3 to 6 real estate agents, about the same number of property managers. I'll try to get a few attorneys, appraisers, really anyone I can talk to. And then of course you go in and talk to the Better Business Bureau and the planning department. You want to understand what's coming down the pike. The government is trying to develop undeveloped areas, and where is it growing, where is it not. If you buy in an area, it's a C area today, but it might be a C- next year, it might be a B. You need to know that. And if there's a big development on the books 3 blocks away that no one knows about, but the planner tells you, you're going to buy up everything inside and you're going to make a killing. But you want to make sure that that's really real, and they don't back out and build 5 miles away, because then you've lost. Then the path of progress is over there, not where you are. So you want to find out where those are, but don't put in the first dollar. Make sure that they've started their investment, they're committed. So I'm actually going to distribute a little case study. Michael, I think you've seen this before. Just grab a couple.
How long of an escrow do this have?
Typically, we'll try to get 90 days. Getting a loan on these tends to take at least 60 days. 60, at least. And it also depends on the type of loan you're getting. If you're getting a Fannie Mae or Freddie Mac loan, 60 days is fine. CMBS, commercial mortgage-backed securities, might take a little longer. A HUD loan will typically take 9 months. And most sellers will not wait, so we typically do a bridge and then a HUD.
And what is the HUD for? Why a HUD?
Why a HUD? The HUD is the only loan out there that's a 35-year fixed. So you can actually get a 35-year fixed loan at 4% right now on an apartment complex, non-recourse. Does everyone know what non-recourse means? If the market crashes and you end up losing the property, they will only go after the property. They will not come back to the borrower. Okay. There are caveats to that. If you commit fraud, if you collect rent and don't pay the rent and just go off to Europe, they will come after you. But if you're running it as best you can and paying them as much as you can and still default, it's non-recourse. You're scot-free.
And the HUD is the only one that has that?
No, Fannie and Freddie are typically non-recourse as well. CMBS can be. But the HUD loans tend to be, $5 million for a HUD is small. Typically 7 to 10 million is really the smallest HUD loans you'll get. The fees can be $150,000. So on a $2 million loan, it's just not worth it. So you can easily get a 10-year fixed loan on a lot of properties. Pretty much everyone else does, 3, 5, 7, or 10-year fixed. But the only 35-year fixed is the HUD. So sometimes it's worth grueling through 9 months.
So in general, what is the ROI?
We're trying to the ones that we put into contract, we're seeing minimum 20% ROI overall. So we'll look at 12% cash on cash up front, part of which the management team will take, and typically 70% or so will go to the investors. So the investors get their numbers first, and then the management team gets a piece. But if you look at 8 to call it 14% annually cash on cash, and then when you sell you get the profits, and the more value add there is, the higher the back end profit. So you might have, let's say, 10% up front and 10 to 15% on the back end annually. Let's say you put in $1 million of investment up front, as a group, and you get $1.5 million out afterwards. Call it $1 million, make it easy. So you've doubled your money over 5 years. That's an extra 20% annually, plus your 10% annual, so you made 30% annually. Make sense? Did you follow the numbers?
Not quite.
Okay. If you're getting 10% annually on cash, on the back end you're basically doubling your money. So if you doubled your money in 5 years, separate from the cash flow, you made 20% annually on the investment. So you add the 20 to the 10, that's a 30% annual return.
So in general, it's about 5 years.
3 to 7 years, again, it depends on the markets. The main thing, we're looking at the markets. So if you're investing in Dallas, for example, that's been going up quite a bit, anything I'm looking at Dallas right now is maybe a 2, maybe 3 year hold, because I don't trust the market. It's been going too far for too long. Houston, I think, is a year and a half, 2 years behind it.
So in that case, if it's going too fast, then wouldn't that be a dangerous market to get in?
I think it still has, the Dallas-Fort Worth area is still growing 120,000 jobs a year, and there's no end in sight right now. So what we're looking for particularly is, are people starting to buy based on speculation or on cash flow? And if they're starting to buy on speculation, I want to sell everything, because that's the start. That's the beginning of the top of the curve. If the job growth starts slowing, you're not getting a 3 to 5% job growth anymore. You're dropping down to 2%. I'll start positioning the property for sale, because as soon as you start slowing the growth and you have all the construction projects in the pipeline, again, you have to look at what's in the pipeline. San Francisco, it has this whole hullabaloo. They're building 30,000 units. They're adding 30,000 homes in the next 5 years. If you think about that, okay, San Francisco typically adds 1,000, 1,200 homes a year, which is nothing. But San Francisco is 49 square miles, 640 acres per mile. That's 31,000 acres. So over 5 years, you're adding 1 home per acre. It's not a whole lot of growth. I think San Francisco can sustain that. So I'm not worried about the San Francisco market. Neither is anyone else, so it's not affordable. But so again, you have to understand the market and what the dynamics are. So the case.
Where's the purchase price?
You have to tell me what the purchase price is.
Oh, I wasn't sure.
So are there any extras out there? Or did everyone get one? Okay. I'll just grab one to look at. Thanks. So actually what I suggest is that you get into small groups, like 3 or 4 of you, and just kind of maybe one person be scribe and the other people kind of look through and try to, please don't look at the back page, but you have a worksheet in here. So use the numbers from the case study and have one of you fill this out. And let's see what you guys come up with and tell me whether this, what you would offer on this and whether you think this is a good deal or not. So I need to turn around, just kind of group up 3s and 4s. Okay. We have a property in Longview, Texas. We were at 98.8% occupancy. So we increased rents by 20%, by $20. And we're still at 97.5%, so we increased rent another $20. It's like, if your occupancy is that high, above the markets, then you're probably leaving money on the table in rent. Okay. Conversely, when you're buying a property that's like that, you want to really look at the concessions. And even when they give you the P&L, the trailing 12, you also want to look at the bank accounts. So once you're in contract, you write your LOI, accept the LOI, put the contract in place. Once you have the contract, you have a laundry list of due diligence items because you trust but verify. Okay, and when you look at their bank account to say, wait, you're saying you have $150,000 a month rent, but I'm seeing $120,000 a month coming in. What happened? Well, you dig deeper. Oh, they were 87% occupied, and they gave all these concessions to fill the place up. And then you find out they weren't screening properly. Now all of a sudden you have a bunch of people you don't want. So you really have to dig deep on some of these things. But when the cash flow is too high, maybe the neighborhood isn't great. If your occupancy is too high, maybe they're either overcharging, either undercharging, which is good, or they just put in concessions that you don't know about. So you just kind of have to play with that.
You find that a lot that they kind of cook the books?
Probably 99+% of the time. It's not cooking the books. It's just, it's called sales. So, any other comments or thoughts?
For us to calculate a purchase price here, you want to have a target cap rate. So in this case, what would be a target cap rate for it?
So, great question. Every market is a little bit different and depending on the property, but 8 cap is kind of a good start. What we call the Holy Trinity is 8 cap, 12% cash on cash, and 1.6 debt service coverage.
And what is that? Can you repeat that one?
So 8 cap, 12% cash on cash, and 1.6 debt service coverage. And does everyone know what all those refer to? You know how to figure out cash on cash? So, debt service coverage? So,
Just for those of us.
debt service coverage is basically net operating income divided by your by the debt service. Let's see if I can fit all of that in there. So most lenders will want 1.2 to 1.3 debt service coverage. What they're saying is that they want to know that you're making 20 to 30% extra above the payments to them, so that you're actually making a profit and you actually want to stay in the game. If you're just working for them and just paying them, what's your incentive to keep the place going? You're going to walk away. But at the same time, if you have a vacancy or if something happens, they want a little cushion there.
On your underwriting template, below the net operating income, you have a $28,000 line item. Is that capital expenses?
On the back?
This is on the underwriting template,
On the back page?
on your,
Which, sorry, I'm not seeing it.
well, he has 28,000, I don't know what that's from.
Oh, he has 28,000. Yeah, I'm not sure. I didn't use that on mine.
Okay.
That's probably CapEx. This is a simplified template. Typically on an apartment complex, you set money aside for major capital improvements. So if 5 years from now you need a roof, you have the money. You're not scrambling because it's not like a single-family home where you have to come up with $5,000. This is $50 or $100 or $200,000. So what's going to happen most of the time, the lender going in is going to get an engineer to go through the property. They're going to evaluate the air conditioning, the roof, the foundations. I mean, what capital expenses are you going to have in the foreseeable next 12 years? And they're going to add all that up, divide by 12 years, divide by the number of units, and you're going to have to put away $250 a door per year, $400 a door per year, whatever that number is. So call it $250 a door. That gets subtracted from net operating income. So what Michael was asking on this line here, you've got the net operating income less $28,000 set aside in reserves. So in a sense, it was income, but it's being set aside for future expenses. And if you sell the property before doing those expenses, you get that back. But obviously, you're not going to sell the property for as much as if you had replaced the roof or whatever. I can manage a 200-unit building an hour a week, literally. You know, I'm on the phone with a management company. I'm not dealing with tenants. I'm not evicting. I'm not doing legal. I'm not unclogging the toilets at 2 in the morning or dealing with a broken pipe. I'm not meeting the fire department at 3 in the morning, which happened. You know, everything is covered. So that's my reason for multifamily. So, but really understand how to underwrite them. Actually, one last thing, just to give you a quick sense. And I know we're running short on time, but Canyon Creek. So once we have one of these in contract, how do I explain this? So what I do, I find these properties. I mean, I'm always looking for properties, and once we find one, I don't have $1 million, $2 million, $5 million to put down. So I go out and find other investors that have jobs that can't do this full time, but are looking to invest, and we put a syndication together and pool our money to buy the property. So these packages are similar. But they're twisted a little bit, just to give you an idea. And I'm going to skip to page 19 here. So this is the same. You know, we'll have the income expense, and we'll project out 5 years what we think we're going to get on this, and then we go into what we think the cash flow is going to be, and what the cash flow to the investors is going to be. So when you're looking at some of these, the syndication packages, you're going to get just that much more projected forwards. But these are all forward-looking statements with many disclosures. So I'm not going to get into that, but just to give you a taste of how these are put together. So anyway, any other questions?
So can you go back to the one before this? You had that 12-unit building.
Yep.
So this is more typical of what kind of a beginning investor is going to see is the, $100,000 in income and $46,000 in expenses, and the world will be a great place, right? Is this kind of the thing that?
Well, I mean, here's the thing. I mean, I played with 6 to 12 unit, or really 6 to 20 unit buildings for 20 years, and I mean, those are much more similar to single-family homes than the larger complexes. Once you get over 50, 60 units, you can afford a full-time manager. Once you get over 100 units, it's much better because now you can afford a manager and a maintenance person. And at 150 plus, you actually have a staff of 4, and then they cover each other. So that's where, as an investor or as a syndicator or a sponsor or whatever you want to call yourself, as running the deal, you're going to have much more control of the project. You're going to have much better service to the tenants. Because by the time I live in a 6-unit building in the city, you know, my the filter on my refrigerator is clogged, so their ice water isn't coming out slowly. It's like, I don't care, you know, I'll get it to it next week. In the complex, they're going to have those filters in stock, and they'll change it out within a half hour, which is very different. So, and I'm not doing it. I don't have to deal with it. I don't even know that it's done. So that's the difference.
And then what was your rate of return when you invested, I'll just say 11 to 50 units versus 50 to 100 versus, you know, there should be brackets. I'm not sure exactly the numbers, but
I mean,
I'm almost certain that at a certain point you have to have an on-site manager. At a certain point, you know, it makes sense to have 2 staff, 3 staff, 4 staff, and all that stuff.
I mean, in California, 15 units and up, you have to have an on-site manager, but not full-time. So typically you give, you know, $200, $300, $400, $500 off to the tenant, and depending on what they do for you, they may janitorial. Sorry?
Is that the law that you have to have?
In California, I think it is. Yeah.
For 15 years out?
Yeah. But again, you know, you might only be giving the $200 off rent. You know, some are collecting rent, some aren't. If they are collecting rent, you know, make it clear to all your tenants, absolutely no cash, because that's an invitation for problems. You know, again, just be smart about it. But I like the economies of scale on the bigger ones. Actual returns, you can get great returns on smaller buildings, but you're going to be hands-on. You know, if you're working in Silicon Valley 70, 80 hours a week, that's not the best thing for you, unless you have a great manager that you totally trust. But there's no such thing. So the managers are all over in the management LLC, and the investors own 60 to 80% of the LLC, and the managers own the rest. And so when you're investing in it, you're basically buying a share of the LLC, and the LLC then owns the property. Does that make sense?
Okay, yeah.
Okay. So, thank you. So.
Very useful. Thank you.